again, Brobri in Brobri Live. We met again after a holiday break in Indonesia, which is quite special because this is episode 99, lucky number. And we are starting with the seldom episode of using full English. I don't know if Martyn is speaking Indonesian, but let's just use English. So I've been having some guests that speaks only English, but it's been a few in between, right? So this is the one of the moment that I need to polish up my English skill, which I think is fine. And now we will be talking today. We'll be talking about why Indonesia needs meritocracy. So if you don't know Martyn, Martyn have been, for me at least, quite vocal in LinkedIn space, voicing about his concerns and his opinions on how tech scene should be run, or how VC should act, or how founders should be in Indonesia, which is quite good, and it's refreshing because I see most of us is being too careful in voicing some of the concerns in the because of afraid of the repercussions. Yeah, I think that's it. But let's welcome Martyn. Martyn's already here. Hey, Martyn.
Hello. I'm just disappointed I can't be on number 100. Only 99. So yeah. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I guess I'm too old to worry too much about reputation. You know, I think you shouldn't really have to worry about giving an opinion. And I think there's an issue, in relation to echo chambers and what that can create. So, but I do know from a lot of PMs that a lot of people share my opinions. It's just that maybe some of the in crowd are much louder in Indonesia, except me. So the people who tend not to agree with most of this tend not to voice their opinions personally, but they will maybe send me a private message about it. So.
Oh, really?
So,
People did send you a private message about it?
yeah, there's a lot of people who totally agree with me, especially experienced business people. I mean, even at minister level, I've talked to people who share my concerns. This is I think what I'm saying is not really, shocking. It's obvious if you look at we'll discuss it more in this conversation. Some of the things I'm pointing out are not questions. How someone can bankrupt a company, lose $70 million of investor money, and then become a VC manager. It just wouldn't happen in the real world. So there is obvious serious concerns about that, because it seems to me that these people are still very, very well respected, and they don't seem to have any accountability for actions at all. As long as you're in the right network, I mean, yeah, I think it's a real concern, when you actually look at the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and it's from what I know, yeah, this has not been only like the past few years, but it's like the past 15 years. It's already happening. Some frauds, some people acting as if he is competent, getting some education abroad, and then using that competencies, or should be, he is going through networks and then being considered as professionals.
Absolutely.
And so on. So it's been rampant in startup. But let's take a step back.
Sorry,
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you can see that by just looking at the backgrounds of some of the people who run the VCs. They don't have a background in finance. It's very different to, and you can't say it's not linked, because it is linked, because the performance is terrible. I mean, you can't even get the information from people. What have you returned to your investors? What's the return of your fund? There is no information. Nobody talks about it. You never you hear about more fundraising, the latest round, but you never hear about results. Now, if the results were good, then the information will be out there. I'm quite happy to share my information about our business growing, etc. But you never hear a peep from a lot of these people, and they generally don't engage with people like me, who kind of understands. Also, they want to engage with fans, I think, more than people like me. So, yeah, I think it's glaringly obvious if you look at it properly. But I think particularly young people who maybe want to to join this glamorous world of startups and VC, they believe that they have to keep on the right side of these people because they may need them. So these people have become, in some respects, like kind of demigods and they get lots of followers on social media without, the competency really. When you look at the confidence, the competency, it is a huge spread here. Huge spread.
Okay, let's take a step back. Martyn, tell me about yourself. I've seen some of your posts, and you mentioned your young experience. So tell me a bit about that, and why did you initially move to Indonesia?
So yeah, I moved to I'm from the UK. I graduated in the UK, just a normal northern university, and I got an opportunity to move to Tokyo and work when I was 23, just after my 23rd birthday, and in the world of finance. And I ended up living there. I only went for 1 year and ended up living there for 12 years. During that time, made my way up the ranks and got to a reasonable level of success. And then I moved to Hong Kong also to work for 5 years, also in finance. Basically investment. So I've been doing investments for many years. So I have got some level of understanding. And yes, it wasn't also my investment. Again, it's different because you have to have. It's not just your MBA or anything. In finance, you need to have your certified certificates, and you need to have a certain level of track record before you get traction. So that's why you'll see that there's not really much nepotism at all in the big banks, etc., despite the claims. I used to work for a family office in Hong Kong, and I ran the show because I was the legal responsible officer. So it doesn't really matter if they have to hire professionals. They can't just do it themselves. They've got to hire the person with like 10 years experience, etc., right? So yeah, I was in finance all that time, totally 17 years, Tokyo and Hong Kong. And then I basically retired early, not really sure what I was going to do. And I started doing a small investment fund myself, actually, a boutique investment fund in Singapore called High Tor Partners, and which basically just I put some money in. But I also have some friends who are reasonably, personally self-made people. And they all say, if you have some good ideas, we'll come in with you. We'll help you out. Let's do something together, maybe. So that's how I started, really. And then, it's a long story how I ended up in Indonesia, but the initial idea was to invest maybe $100,000 in multiple investments. The problem with that was, as a foreigner, I could only be a nominee shareholder at that level. And I wanted to make a PMA, and to make a PMA, the investment had to be, I think, nearly $1 million. So it wasn't as easy to open multiple companies. So I started doing a lot of research into the market, and I actually had some reasonably good connections in Indonesia. People might know that I've done seminars with Sandiaga Uno and people, and so I know some reasonable people here. And then I also worked with one of the minister's sons when I first came. I won't go into too much detail on that, but they introduced me to some opportunities here. So I basically was shown this idea by a quite prominent, not this idea, but shown the Indonesian market by a quite prominent family here who showed me, what the opportunities were. And that's how I ended up doing this. I did a lot of research into what to do, not just, I straight away, I was running away from B2C investments because it's promo driven. I don't think you can make money in a market like Indonesia ever. In fact, I think it's very, very, very hard because if it's easy to replicate, it's just the person with the most money, but they'll just lose more money. And I think that's what happened. So I looked at a B2B, and there's very little B2B opportunity in Indonesia. And again, I see all the VCs, all they talk about is the population and the resources, the population, 280 million people, the number of MSMEs. How many of these people are ever going to be paying clients? That's the question. So you can't force software on these MSMEs when they're not willing to pay even $1 for it 1 year later. And this whole business plan of doing that, I thought was flawed from the outset. And this isn't me being wise after the event. I talked out about this 5 or 6 years ago. I told some of the major fund managers in Indonesia that they were going to have serious trouble with their portfolios because this doesn't make sense. And I, explained to them that interest rates would kill them, and interest rates are cyclical. And do they not teach you this on MBA courses? So basically, I went in a different way, and I went into geospatial software. Yeah, and I've got to, it wasn't something I really thought about. It was something that I talked to a few people about. And as I say, I talked to one of the prominent families about, and it seemed that Indonesia didn't really have something like this. So I decided to give it a go. And that's how we started, really. Originally, I partnered with a local family here, but after 2 years, I bought them out because we had different. Again, it's people always wonder how do I manage to buy them out, but I guess I deal with facts, not personality. I don't deal with reputation, to be honest. I've met many very, very wealthy people globally. In my old job, I worked for billionaires, so it's not new to me to deal with these people and not fall out, but have disagreements. I think they find it quite shocking here that people will say something backwards, but so we're all on good terms. But I bought these guys out after 2 years, and then carried on the business, and now we have 170 people, I think, in BSD, and around 70 clients. So it's been very difficult though. There's no glamour in what I'm doing. I'll tell you now, I could be getting paid a lot of money if I went back into finance. I get offered jobs a lot when I go to Hong Kong and Tokyo. I don't take a salary from BVT, and so BVT to me is there's no benefit until we're highly successful. And in B2B business, you cannot just talk about the population for your valuation. So it's a very different game. You know what I mean? So basically, we are a real business in every. We deal with our clients are people like Telkomsel, Accenture, Danone, Nestle, and we deal with the big boys. It's very hard to get them, and I don't think most people would put the effort in that we've put in. I mean, I don't stop. I just carry on, and I'm quite relentless because basically I put most of my life savings into this business between investing the money and buying my earlier partners out. It's cost me millions of dollars, and I made that legitimately, not through family money. So my family have nothing. So they never used to have. So basically, it's kind of become my life. So I guess that's maybe why the results are a little bit different, because we've got no choice. And I'm lucky as well. I have a good network of friends who can, very easy for me to do short-term financing and stuff with friends of mine. People I've known for 20 years. There's a very high level of trust with some of the major financiers in Japan and Hong Kong. So we don't have to operate in this runway model of always trying to, being panicking, which is obviously in a B2B, that's scary because payments are often late, payments are often not on time. So yeah, that's basically how I ended up here. And I never really thought about location intelligence until this opportunity came about. And so I can't claim to have thought of the idea, but once somebody told me the idea, I really researched it to look at what companies were doing globally with this and how the sector was growing. And I think, even now we've just opened in Vietnam. There's nobody there our size already. We've already started talking to big companies in Japan. Japan, there is competition, but it's not an overbroked market like many things. So I think it's a good opportunity, but yes, it's a very, very hard when you need to get B2B clients, especially the big guys, because they don't like dealing with startups normally.
That's coming from you that have networks.
Yeah, it's very hard. I think B2B, I'd love to sit here and tell people that anyone could do it, but I can't say that's the case because other people try it and they can't because, I have network, plus I'm willing to say what I think, to anybody. And I've got the direct numbers of some of Indonesia's oligarchs. I just call them and ask them what's going on. It doesn't bother me at all. I think they respect it because they know that I don't view everybody as like above me and below them. I basically succeeded from zero in 3 countries, so I don't think any of them have. So I'm quite confident to hold a conversation with them. But yeah, when it comes to B2B, you know, most of the VCs can't really connect you with anybody. They can only connect you with startups in reality. So when it comes to what I need as a client, I don't need startups as clients. They never have any money. You know, I need the big boys, and the big boys much harder to get into. And now we're working more on a distribution model, working with the likes of Metrodata. We've worked with Microsoft, working with Viettel in Vietnam. I've got a meeting next week with NTT in Japan. But again, that's not possible even with connection. In the first 5 years, most established companies are worried about dealing with startup companies. You know, they're concerned about it because they're worried that the company won't be there in 5 years. So they don't want to take that risk. And obviously Indonesia as well, often we give people an idea and then people try to build it themselves. Often is the case. Still not aware of any success stories, but we know it happens. In fact, one of the major corporations, BUMN, just signed a contract with us in December. I first met them 5 years ago, I think, and they've been building their own for 5 years, and now finally they decided that it's not cost effective. It's not their core business. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's not easy B2B because you've got to be on it all the time. You've got to be willing to push people, and it's hard for me to get a sales team as well with the same mentality. But they're getting there. Honestly, I've got some great people, and we've, as I say, coming on to the meritocracy, we promoted within and done well in the end. Yeah.
Now, on to about meritocracy, Martyn. So, would you say that Indonesian tech scene or startup or business scene is meritocratic, or is it not?
Not at all. Not in the slightest. Not
Really?
in the slightest. I mean, of course not. Most of the people who launch startups in Indonesia, the ones that get big funding, are Ivy League educated from the US,
Yes.
who have connections at the VC funds from Jakarta International School. So this isn't, they all have to speak perfect English. I mean, I'm a very confident individual and I wouldn't want to pitch to a VC because I wouldn't want them to look, act arrogantly towards me without a track record. So I've luckily not had to go through that process. But can you imagine some, this very clever, smart guy who can't speak very good English, who went to ITB, being able to roll up at these VC guys in Ashta Tower? I don't think so. I don't think so. These people who run the VCs, some of them, in my opinion, are megalomaniacs based on very little. I don't know where the confidence comes from. It doesn't make sense. I've sat and talked to CEOs of BUMN VCs, and this peer-to-peer lending concept of lending money to people who are never going to pay you back. It's always like, blew my mind that this was considered like a company that was not going to go wrong at some point. And the fact that the BUMN was so heavily involved. But again, it's I don't want to pick out individuals, but you only have to look at the background of the people, what track record these people had before they set up investment funds, before they got jobs. This is at the VC. So the VC managers first. I don't think any of them have got a strong track record outside of Indonesia. I don't think any of them can point to strong returns. I'm pretty much sure. So, and if they could, please tell me, because I post about this often and nobody ever comes back and says, oh, actually, Martyn, I've returned 12% a year since 2010. Nobody ever comes back. People just come out and just say, oh, yeah, we were investor in Gojek. Well, that's not ended up very well, has it really, for a lot of investors? So if that's your claim to fame, I don't really think that's it's a different model. The top hedge fund managers in the world did 20 years in banks before they got into that. So for starters, the people who run in the VCs are definitely not the most talented people in the country in investments. I would imagine there are other people out there, plus Indonesians I know working in banking in Tokyo and Hong Kong, who just don't have the second name, so they don't come here. But they would be far more, I believe, experienced at the role than the people currently doing it. But the problem is there's no checks and balances as well. So these guys say something and everyone likes it and cheers them on, and there's no hard questions or panel in conversation. So that's the VC side of it. And of course, if you look at all these companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, look at the founders. The founders are the friends of the VCs from the schools. These are not, they're not people, most of them are young Chinese and speak perfect English. They all educated overseas. They learn the VC game on the MBA. The VC game must be. I don't have an MBA, and I won't ever let my kids to get one after what I see, because it seems to me that you've got Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, teaching blitzscaling at Chicago booth, and people take him literally. Well, LinkedIn could blitzscale because it was the first player in the market at a time. Was very different for VCs. In that day and age, there was not many VCs around and not many opportunities. Now everybody wants to be a VC, and everybody seemingly can be a VC if you've got some connections, or could be a few years ago, and everybody wants to be a founder. And some of these valuations that were given for companies which were just ideas from friend to friend, you must know how it works. In Indonesia, just one of the rich kids is the seed investor in a startup, right? And then he goes and talks to his mates at the VC to buy him out 10 times in a year's time. And then the local VC goes to the foreign VC to go to 10 times the year after, right? So it's a game. It's an investment management game. It's not it's a maintenance fee game. It's not an investment game. There's no results from this. It's just pump and dump. But yeah, look at the founders of and I'm not having to go at these people. Some of them are my friends. People think it's personal. It really isn't. But look at what they did before and suddenly what they do. These are not people with stellar track records. These are not people who necessarily have made money. Just because you worked in the president's office at Gojek doesn't really mean anything. You know what I mean? It means that you can't manage money very well. And that's the problem. So no, I mean, coming on to it, I have some staff I have a few people who work for me who I'm 100% sure could run things better than is being run, but they don't have the name, which is lucky for me. I mean, my deputy CEO is 28-year-old woman. I hired her 3 years ago in one role, and she's just smart. So I just keep on promoting, and now she basically runs a company very, very effectively with 170 staff. Now, I don't think that's very easy for people with no name to get to that situation in Indonesia. And we talk about my head of sales came in as a junior salesperson, because I'm all big on meritocracy, because I started with nothing and ended up becoming reasonably wealthy. So not anymore, but a few years ago. So yeah, I believe I've seen all this throughout my career. Finance is very, very leveling. You get people who don't, despite all the media. I worked with guys who left school at 16, who were sandwich delivery boys in the city of London, ended up they give them a go and ended up becoming some of the biggest traders in Asia. You know what I mean? So just because they didn't have the family money to go to university, or they didn't have the push, they ended up being very smart. So, I think my head of sales was working in a hotel 5 years ago, and he came as a junior salesperson wanting to get into tech, and he gets it. And he's very smart. So he's been promoted in line with that, right? Now, I don't see that happening across the board, no, because I just see the same people moving from company to company, and in the big roles. So, yeah, the example of taking a company bankrupt and then being a VC advisor, it's astonishing to me, and the fact that nobody in Indonesia picks these people out, and these people, they write social media posts, which are acting like it's their money. Don't waste my time, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sat there reading, you've lost so much money for your investors, and now you're going to write this as a VC manager? No, they couldn't get away with it in other countries because people would call them out everywhere. I call them out because I can't listen. I can't listen to it. But
hire them to be a partner or associate for them.
Well, yeah. Friends again. I don't know that. There's a very small demographic of the people running venture capital, and a lot of them have got names of famous politicians as well. So I mean, there's a lot of it's a very small group of people who are even in line for that kind of job. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know. There's not. If you look at who's working in certain companies, it's the same group of people, and some of these people have very little track record. They may have done 6 months at McKinsey or something like that, which not really, gives you the opportunity to be a fund manager. But the question more deeply is, when are the LPs going to get fed up? But that's another question. that's another question to come on to it, because you've got to start asking, in some respects, if these guys can raise more funds now, you've got to start looking at this being a money laundering game, because it doesn't make a great deal of sense. You know, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing. So if these guys can go and raise 200 million having never returned money to investors, yeah, something doesn't make sense. It's like the whole e-fishery thing. Like, again, nothing, I've met the guy before, nothing personal. Do I believe that that guy hoodwinked all these kids of famous people? No, I don't. I don't. It's impossible. Because if you look at the figures of e-fishery, the returns they were claiming were simple, I think, more than Chiputra's annual returns.
Mm.
Now, that's crazy. And I was discussing this with one of the Chiputra kids, actually. That's crazy. And it's crazy. It doesn't make sense. So I think to sit there and say, oh, we got hoodwinked, that's not just hoodwinking, that's gross negligence. And it's for me, it cannot be negligence. It's got to be that everybody knew what was going on, but wanted to keep it going to get IPO. Unfortunately, the IPO market dried up, and now somebody blew the whistle. And let's face it, Deal Street Asia broke this story, and at first it was denied. But unfortunately, and again, it's very hard to comprehend all the people working there. And I don't want to attack people personally, but if I stated my revenues $100 million tomorrow in the media, I think someone in my staff would like, what is he talking about? You know what I mean? So if somebody's working in the company and you are exaggerating your revenue by ridiculous amounts, somebody must know in the company what's going on, not just the directors. They claim to have 400,000 fish feeding, I think, devices, but only 6,000 were actually working. So, I mean, unless nobody in the company was actually going to work, I don't know. It's very hard for me to get my head around how the data can be so, because I just can't see how that could possibly happen in a company like BVT. You know, I claim to have 70 clients, and if somebody comes back and says, actually, you're lying, you've got 10, I'll give them a list of 70 clients, right? But when you're dealing with this MSME and B2C, it's all very, they can claim to having clients, but it's all very, not very easy to see, is it? Because they claim having clients by just they're downloading an app or something. They download the app for this. They may not have the software or the hardware that works with the app. Like this is like we've seen this with all these MSME all these MSMEs. They claim to have 70,000 active clients, but there's only like 60 or something. And some of these guys raised lots of money. You know, the likes of, and again, I don't want to name individual companies, but you know what I mean. There's these companies, these food delivery, like Buku are running people like this. The revenues that they have compared to the investment they've had is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And any business like that's the same. And but again, it all comes down to a few years ago, everybody in the world thought MSME tech was the way forward, and the year before that, everybody thought the way forward was cloud kitchen tech. Now, number one, it's not tech. Actually, so let's stop giving it a tech valuation. It's a shop with an app, like all the coffee shops. Right? They're not tech. They're not tech-enabled coffee at all. It's you know, Walmart has an app now. It's still a supermarket. So yeah, I think if these guys were so clever, they'd be able to get performance. Standout performance, I don't think will be very hard in Indonesia. Actually, I think it'd be very easy to do standout performance here, because I think so much of it is just copied. Everyone jumps on it. Follow on investment. Everyone's into climate tech now. Nobody knows how they're going to make money out of climate tech, but everybody's into it, you know? So, yeah, I don't think it's very hard to outperform what's going on here, because I don't think there's any unique ideas. Every single year, there's a new idea that everyone jumps into, you know? And what they do is the funds are so big, too big. I don't think a VC fund in Indonesia can be more than $100 million and be successful. I think it cannot be, because I always give example. My best friends run one of the best Japanese equity funds, and they closed it at $1 billion because they feel the opportunity at anything more than $1 billion, they start to affect their performance, which they've been managing money for. These guys are in their 50s, managing money for major Japanese institutions. So Japanese long-short equity market is one of the most liquid markets in the world. These guys have 20 years experience So why do people in Indonesia with no experience or very little experience believe they can run $500 to $1 billion in startup world? And the problem is when the funds get that big, the bets have to be big as well because they can't write small checks. So the bets get bigger and bigger. And that's why you've got Investry and eFishery, because they just keep pumping them up. You can't, if you give me $20 million tomorrow, I don't know what to do with it, right? And it would destabilize my company. And a VC needs me. If a VC writes me a check of 20 million today, they need to come to me and say to me, Martyn, I need you to need 200 million in 1 year's time.
Yeah.
That's the only way I'm going to get my valuation up. And that's the game. And it's a stupid game. And it's obviously, and let's not, it's been a stupid game for many years. If you look at Andreessen, what's he called, Mark Andreessen, his last 20 bets have all been a disaster. And this idea that it's only Indonesia is not true. The VC playbook has been broken for multiple years. There's a slight difference. I think you have to have a little bit more experience to get into the jobs in these other countries. Like if you look at some of the VC managers in Japan, they've done many years in investment banking, for example. So it's more on a meritocracy. But, you know, this idea that they can only keep going to that's why you've got private companies now like Stipe that don't need to IPO because they just keep on raising and raising and raising. OpenAI is just, I think, raised 30 billion or something crazy. They've got no idea how they're ever going to make money. I don't know. But this side, the trouble is the bets have got bigger. The bets have got bigger and bigger. And once the bets get that big, you're just following on into the same fund. So that's why you've seen some of these 15-minute grocery deliveries raise hundreds of millions of dollars over a few years. You know, number one, friends. Number two, it's what the VC need them to do. It's not their fault. The VC need them to need to get follow-on investors, particularly from other countries. This is the game, and of course, the results cannot be good on that game. What they need is more professionals running smaller, nimble funds. Because I think this opportunity in Indonesia is very high. I think outperformance is not hard at all if you do it properly, because it can't be a coincidence that one foreigner turns up, has one bet, and it kind of works. You know, it can't be, and that person happens to have 20 years business experience. It can't be a coincidence. So the fact that we've done business in a proper way, you know, the salaries all got out of control and everything during this bubble. Everybody was in on this game, and it never made any sense to people outside that bubble, to be honest. So no, I mean, I think the lack of meritocracy doesn't really help that situation, obviously.
Okay, so then my question would be, Martyn, if everyone knows, or at least they can guess, where it will end, if there's no meritocracy and this is what's happening, why do we keep doing that?
I've got no idea. I mean, I think some of these guys have taken fake it till you make it to new levels. I mean, some of the big names here, people think I'm crazy, but I've offered to go to TV debate. You know, I want to know what they've got to say. They're very uncomfortable dealing with people like me. Very uncomfortable. In fact, some of these people will avoid me if I meet them at B20. They will disappear. They don't want to talk to people. They don't want me on panels. It's a very two-tier system. People don't understand. These VC guys are only big in the VC world. So I don't really mix in the VC world. I mix in the private sector. So I have connections directly to ministers. I have connections to some of the owners of the biggest companies in Indonesia. I don't know if these are LPs in these funds. I'm not sure. But a lot of the views are kind of similar, you know. But these guys are in their own little ecosystem where everybody supports them. So maybe they just think, I've got to keep it going now, because if you know, we can't let it stop now, and hope with each issue. Yeah, just hope for more investment. I don't know. How did this guy from Investry not think he was going to get caught? I don't know. But it's not just Indonesia. How did Kenneth Lay at Enron not think he was going to get caught? How did the girl who sold her company with fake to JP Morgan? I mean, how they got away with it in the first place, it blows my mind. But there is this mentality, I think, this Forbes under 30 mentality. You've got to understand that the tech media has blown smoke up these guys' backsides for years. You know, I mean, they release, the tech media now have changed because they've been sold by the VC. So you might notice for the first time ever, the tech media is actually digging into it. And they don't like me saying that because I've fallen out years ago with the tech media because they constantly release lists of companies in Indonesia, the number one software as a service company, the number one bootstrap company, and I'm never anywhere near it. And I pretty much know that's not true. So I asked them where they got the numbers from or where they got the data from. But again, it's exercising kissing the backsides of the same people. And the problem is, if you create that world where people are not used to being challenged and they can't handle being challenged, you get in a situation where these people actually start believing everything they say, and megalomania becomes. And I mean, how does a person who's bankrupted quite a big startup here start spouting on LinkedIn about, about how he's like a god in investments and don't waste his time? I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I say stuff on LinkedIn, as you know, as a counterbalance to this. But if people want to challenge me, that's fine. If people want to say to me, I don't believe you, come to my office. I don't care. It's that's the thing. Nobody wants to, and you got to look at who my partners in my company are. If you look on our website, they are proper financiers, like 20, 30-year veterans. So, it's a different model. I don't know why it keeps happening. It blows my mind when I start hearing Indonesia has so much opportunity. It has this, they really need to start making real tech and not just this scheme of just get in, get out, because what generational company was ever built using this model? In the old days, VC, yes, VC backed Compaq, backed Hewlett Packard, but different time, backed Amazon. But in those days, the heads of those companies are still around today. They didn't just do it to get rich quick. In Indonesia, all I see is 2, 3, 4 times founder, as if it's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor. Just founding more and more companies. The world doesn't need this many companies. I'm sorry. If every single person wants to be a founder and not an employer, or everyone wants to be a VC, of course, it's a massive oversupply in the market. So there's been an oversupply of money. And now what should happen in that market is that the strong should survive. And therefore, when I started working in finance, within 2 years, 20 people I started working with, there was 2 left. Right? That's what it should be like. And then you get the top performing, top decile fund managers out there who will perform, and you'll get the top performing startups. But it's not happening because all the top performance means raising more money. And all they're creating is zombie companies, like companies that are on life support for the rest of their lives. There's many startups in Indonesia that are very likely to go bankrupt this year. Very likely. Unicorns, particularly. Unicorns and unicorns just over the $1 billion. They can't get fundraising. You know this because all their staff are leaving and telling everybody. It's a very sad picture. And I would imagine, this IPO that we're getting next week, which I recently had a bit of a disagreement with the EV boss, East Ventures boss on this. But, IPOing in the current market wouldn't make a lot of sense if you're doing really well. It just wouldn't. Now, I think the company might be doing well, but I think the funds must have some problems because, you can't talk. You can't talk to any serious financier who buys that story. Unfortunately, again, you might get 1,000 likes and bro, great bro, you're Elon Musk of Indonesia, bro. We've seen it. I know. This is what it's like. You won't get a serious financier who's got a proper job thinking that's a good idea, and that suggests to me that there is some potential issues, with some of this, and there needs to be a rethink, but the rethink would involve a lot of humble pie, and the rethink would not involve a lot of these people based on performance. And if you look at Vietnam, some of the big Vietnam venture funds, they are, and private equity, they are run by ex-Goldman Sachs people. They're run by people with a track record of doing it. Investment is like flying a plane. You get an MBA, you can't fly a plane. You get an MBA, you can't do brain surgery. They are vocational skills. And there's more to investing than just making noise and throwing money at things, especially things that your friends are involved with, thinking, we've got family connections here, we can just push it up and get out, which has been the strategy, basically. Grab, let's get this right, Grab was not allowed to IPO in Singapore. The Singapore government had no intention of allowing Grab to. They might say it's a tech company, but they knew the results of the IPO, so they were not going to let their retail get hosed. Indonesia has no problem getting holes, because you understand, during the grab situation, members of the stock market are also members of the grab board. So members of the stock market board are members of the grab Gojek board. Sorry, so it's just a small group of people who now have another job. Who's the cousin of my ex-partner. So putting the dots together, but it's hard to actually get results if you just. But are those people going to let their grip on it and listen to outsiders? They're not. They don't even mix in there. Like if I go to a breakfast called Castle Asia, it's got like the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the CEO of MAP, Plaza Indonesia boss, all these people, they go to this thing. You never see a VC guy there. You don't, because they won't have fans. So this idea that these VCs are really connected at the top level, I don't see it. They have their fans and their ability to raise money from their parents' friends or connections. But you don't see a lot of these guys because they don't have that aura when they walk into a room of people, professionals, because professionals are like, well, can you explain that? Can you explain that? Normal questions in business. People always ask me to explain things. I can explain it because it makes sense. I can tell you how much I charge my clients. I can tell you, what the margin is on my clients. A lot of these guys can't answer simple questions on their products. It's scary, and why it keeps happening, because the people, if you're one of these people, are you going to give it up? It seems like these people are getting a tighter grip on it, not a lower grip. You're not going to be able to launch a fund, are you? You're not going. Where are you going to get the money from? I've even thought about starting my own fund in Indonesia, because I do think there's opportunity. There's a lot of clever people who don't see the light of day. And that's what's so disappointing. Again, it comes back to Indonesian government don't seem to have a real interest in innovation. It's buzzwords at conferences. It's not really invested in. Like in Vietnam, for example. Vietnam, it's a communist country, no election, so less time on politics. It's a good thing, I think. Yes. It's a good thing, right? I hate to say this, but Vietnam have a huge tech industry now because they've invited like the likes of Intel and Apple into the country. All this foreign investment builds the tech culture. It builds the young people who, I've got guys working for me at the moment who've worked for NVIDIA and stuff, and doing outsourcing in Vietnam through FPT Group. Of course, if you've got that experience, then these guys will have the ability to go off and do their own thing. They're not, because most of the founders in Indonesia don't actually have a background in technology at all. Now, I don't either. I don't have a background in technology, so I hired people who do. Now, I don't always make the right choices, but I certainly cannot run this business on my own, and I certainly cannot have an opinion on the technology side of things, which has been a problem, to be honest. It's been very difficult because sometimes I've been lied to and told things are great when things are not great, and I couldn't really question it. But if you have all these like young people leaving work and going to work at Apple, or going to work, leaving university, going to Apple, and I think the opportunity to upskill the workforce will increase. And there are, just in BVT, let's look at BVT over the last 6 years. At least 3 of my staff came in reasonably junior and now basically very senior. So that's just a small company, So there must be a lot of people around like that. You know what I mean? Now, one of the girls working for me, she was Astra before, I think, and she was do you think she's going to get to deputy CEO without a second name at a young age? No. I mean, and what do I think? From the people I've dealt with in Indonesia in business, she's more qualified than anyone I've ever talked to run things. She understands balance sheet. She gets everything. She just understands it all. She could run rings around people. She's that good. And not just her, I've got other people as well who just would not see the light of day. So I think if you had more, big tech companies in Indonesia allowing people to upskill and give more confidence to people, because the relationship at the moment for a lot of people who want to start their own company, they've got to go and beg these people in Ashton Tower. And I can't imagine that's very easy, because even for me, I couldn't do it, I don't think. So if you're not of that kind of personality, how do you do it? So how do we get to a situation where the actual reality, Indonesia, huge population, GDP doesn't matter also. GDP per capita matters. This story about GDP is one of the biggest problems, because it does. They're not all paying clients. They don't. When your government is trying to hammer Apple, they've got to understand that Singapore is probably a bigger market for Apple. It doesn't. This concept of being a huge market. They need per capita growth to grow. But again, is there interest of the people running the show to have more and more super smart people? Because if you look at the UK, the top 10 richest people, seven of them were born poor. You know what I mean? So, in Meritocracy in the UK, the owner of Manchester United was born poor. One of the owners. The guy who started the hedge fund Bluecrest was born in Preston. These are not people from established backgrounds, but they were geniuses. A lot of people like that, and you look in the US as well. And that, I think that really is what you need to really get an economy working.
It's not happening here, and the government definitely is not incentivized to make it happen.
Of course, because the minute you create a meritocracy, the people are judged on their abilities, not their connections. Now, connections are important. Connections are important. I get it, but you've got to, I have connections, but the people I'm connected to would not deal with me if I was rubbish. You know what I mean? They wouldn't just deal with me because of my second name. So, I have friends who are self-made billionaires. The whole thought process of these people is very different. It's very different, and yeah, once you've got that whole world of a meritocracy of where people feel like they don't have a glass ceiling anymore. I think at BVT, people don't have a glass ceiling. I tried to provide a career for everyone, and I give shares to people, and people also, and I'm trying to socialize it more. I'm trying to tell people this is your ticket to make money, because if you have shares in BVT, I'm going to do a proper IPO with this, or I'm going to have a proper trade sale with this. So, but again, even some of my staff, the younger ones, they're still in that world where they don't understand because there's no VCs involved. How can they do this? Because we have no famous names involved. People think, how's Martyn doing this? They don't really understand there's a big world outside Indonesia. And there's a lot of people who've made a lot of money from zero. But yeah, of course, in a lot of these countries, as you say, they're not incentivized. Because if they had somebody who'd worked for Goldman Sachs for 20 years in Hong Kong or Tokyo and had run stellar funds, it would be more and more difficult to choose who was going to be running the sovereign wealth fund, right? It's better not to have people like that around Indonesia. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people don't particularly like me being in Indonesia because people often say to me I should get bodyguard because I highlight things which are not really. It's not rocket science. Actually, I don't think I'm being clever. I think it's kind of obvious. It's kind of obvious, but nobody wants to say it,
So my experience, I was starting out as a founder, right? But then in around 2011-ish, the startup scene started to grow very quickly. And one of the things that I've observed at that time is it's really, really, really hard to maintain your team and employees, because most of these people are running out to those startups, which are paying like crazy. And that's why I decided to stop. One of it is switch to being a professional, because I will not be able to compete. And right, those that got investments are those that have connection, as you said. And I see myself firsthand that it's very, very kind of like impossible for you if you are no one, you're not educated outside of Indonesia to get that. Now, my question now to you, in this kind of situation, which can be said that it's improving, like it's normalizing, what should people that maybe founders, what should founders do at this kind of situation? Is it already a good time to start like running a real business that is trying to be profitable, or VC game is still okay as long as you know what you're aiming, or what do you think?
I think first of all, your problem is huge. I lost a lot of staff. I couldn't compete with the salaries. I always think that I'm a businessman, and I know that I know when my staff are getting offered 300% to move, that they cannot. I know that cost cannot be passed on to the client in Indonesia. You know what I mean? I've interviewed data scientists wanting 190 million a month. I have interviewed CTOs wanting 350 million a month. You cannot pass that on. All work for VCs getting that kind of money. VC-backed startups getting that kind of money. They know it's crazy. They know it's crazy. They absolutely know it's crazy. The CTO of a startup gets paid far more than the CTO of a conglomerate in Indonesia, or has done in the past, despite the fact they don't have the track record necessarily the same. So this whole game has been very strange. So yeah, I lost people, and it's very disappointing. You know, I've invested a lot into people, and sometimes it upsets me when people just leave. That's something that I don't know can't put my finger on it. I've got a very close group who, you know, are tied into the company long term with shares, but the other people, it's sometimes hard to get. People will move. You know, the mentality of Indonesia is that they don't really believe in things like ESOP and stuff. So your first point is very true. Getting staff is very hard. I think the way to succeed in Indonesia is don't just copy everyone else. You know, don't just start talking about AI. I mean, someone told me last week they've got a startup. AI can book me a taxi. I'm like, right. What about the Bluebird app? You know, I just don't understand. People are coming out with are you really fixing a problem? Because a lot of it's not fixing a problem. It's trying to. But if you're a real person and trying to make a real company, I believe if you make a real company, the valuation will come with it. You know, once you get to the revenue multiples, and especially Indonesia, where there's so few generational companies that have been built in the last 20 years. All the generational companies in Indonesia are historic, you know, Cinemas, BCA, Jarum Group, sorry. So some of their kids are all trying to evolve in the startup world, but they haven't had much success if you look at the numbers. Even the biggest people here have not succeeded in the startup world particularly, because everybody has looked for the shortcut. Let's just copy an idea out of the US, put an Indonesian name on it, and raise money. And because of the population size, and it's not just here. India's also I read some politicians saying that while China's building EVs, India's making, you know, some kind of oxygen coffee or something, coffee with oxygen in or something like that. You know, he's like, it's all faddy investments. Why hasn't Indonesia got its own EV? I mean, VinFast is now the biggest, one of the biggest EV companies, right? They're even in Indonesia now. They're building a factory in Indonesia. How has that happened? Why it's happened again? The founder of VinFast is the richest man in Vietnam, but he was not born the richest man in Vietnam.
Oh, really?
He actually, yeah, really. Vietnam is not as bad as here because it's a much younger country. So in 1975, really after the war, so you don't have the same. There, of course, there is some, but they're really cracking down on corruption as well by the richest lady in the country just been given the death sentence, which is quite serious. But yeah, VinFast. The story about the guy from VinFast is he went to university in Ukraine, I think, because rather than America, Vietnam tend to go to Russia or China because obviously of the communism. So he went to the university in Ukraine. He started some noodle company, I think, and he sold it to Kraft Heinz, I believe. This is the story, and then he went back to Vietnam and started several businesses. So yeah, I mean, there's some like starting a real business and growing from there. But the problem is everybody wants to be $1 billion company in 3 years, you know? And somebody was explaining to me, if you look at like people like Marks and Spencer's, their valuation like is less than some of these startups. It doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? It just does. It's a 100-year-old company. And this is where the story's gone crazy. And it's happening now with AI. As people need to really look, is it a problem that needs solving? And I think start with a little team and get your product market fit, get selling to clients. Don't go straight to VCs because it's going to be, you can't keep up to VCs, But again, your problem is, as you say, you will lose staff because unless they really believe in you and really, really buy into you, which I have a few people who do, but not as many as I would like. But people have really got to buy into you if they get offered 300% salary. It's hard. And I've lost a few, but I mean, I've had people come to me and say, Martyn, I've been offered another 20 million. I'd like to stay here. And I just say, well, you can stay here, but you won't be getting that from me. And you make that choice. Ask yourself the question, will that company be here in 6 months' time paying you that? when I'm sure their revenue is not as high as ours. So how are they possibly paying you that? And I cannot break that wage structure. I just cannot. There is a wage structure in place. I want people who are there for the long term, so incentivized to stay. So, some of my staff, if they leave, they have to pay me a lot of money. I've got things like this ongoing, like I've got shares options going. But yeah, I think it's very hard, as you say, in Indonesia to do this. I've done it, but I bootstrapped, but slightly cheating because I had a career before. So I did have substantial resources. So I understand not everyone can do what I've done. So that's the problem, right? And then I work out how hard it's been. It really makes you think, can people do it? And I think, to be honest, the cards are loaded against you here. They're really loaded against you here because it's not. I would think very hard before I did it. It's not all glamour to be a founder. It might look glamorous when the InvestTree guys in Qatar showing at his Formula One having stolen all this money. It looks very glamorous, I guess. He has no self-awareness. He has no self-awareness at all. It all seems glamorous, right? All these guys with the nice cars, living in the nice apartments, but actually that's kind of fake. The reality is once the money dries up, most of the companies are dead. And that's not a nice situation to be in for a company. So people should think long and hard. Do I really need to be a founder? No, should I at least have a career first. Build it, have a career. Learn your experience. Learn how to manage money. Learn, if in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and BVT IPOs or my deputy CEO leaves, she's had a lot of experience of running a company, running a balance sheet. She knows much more than the average person. She talks to my advisors who are some of the biggest financiers in Asia. So she has board meetings with real serious professionals, we have Indonesian oligarchs in meetings with us. We discuss things with ministers. The experience that you get from doing that is very good. And the experience you get when doing that, when not everybody's saying yes to you because you're not a famous person, you know what I mean? So I think getting experience in a proper job, I was nowhere near qualified to do this 20 years ago. Nowhere near. I was a young kid, young stockbroker making a lot of money in Tokyo. You know what I mean? I had no responsibility. I went to work, made money and got paid. I wasn't capable to run a business. I work 24/7 here. It's really, really difficult to succeed. And if you've got young family, it will drain you, if you haven't got VC money. So there is no glamour to being a founder, actually, a real founder, not just like this money game. So I would everyone get experience first. Go and work for a big conglomerate. Go and work overseas if you can. Learn other ways of working. I've worked in four countries. 5 countries. Learn other people's ways of working and get that experience. Because if you get that experience, I'm not always the easiest person to deal with. And somebody commented on my LinkedIn about this yesterday. But I actually got on very well with my staff. But they know that I'm not there just to look good. I'm there to make money, and I'm quite hard with it. I was very annoyed this week that everybody's put their phone off for the whole week. Next year will not be happening next year simply because I have clients in Vietnam now. And I have opened in Japan. So this idea that you can put your phone off for 10 days, it's just not possible. Again, if people want to make the big bucks, they've got to understand you're marrying your job effectively if you're working at a growth startup without VC money. There's no glamour in it at all. So yes, if people have a real passion, but don't just be a founder because everybody else is being, and don't buy into all this media about the glamour of this life, because the glamour of that life is for very few people. Because most people who lost $70 million of investor money would not then be hired as a VC advisor, would they? But of course not. And the problem is they don't even have the self-awareness to think that's a bit funny. They don't think that they frame it in the VC world. They frame it as, at least I've learned from my losses. That's fine. That's fine. But you've got to have some successes also. Loss is part of life. Everybody loses sometimes. But this idea that you've lost big once and now you're an advisor, I don't get it. You know what I mean? I can't buy into it, and I think it's part of the problem. The glamour isn't there. If you want to start a proper company, it's not glamorous at all. And I think everyone should be careful about, I want to be a founder, because it became, number one, in realism, the world's not big enough to absorb all these new companies. There's too many new companies. And if you're going to be an AI company, I think you need to calm down, because you're never going to beat Microsoft and AI and all these guys. These guys are just burning money. This is a thing I would keep out of AI. I know it's not popular, but everybody's trying to do AI. And how the hell are you going to compete when these guys are raising 40 billion? You know what I mean? It's not possible. I mean, they're global companies. You've got to be realistic. I mean, you've got to be sensible. I'm building my software now in multiple countries because I believe I've got opportunity in other countries to make more money than I am in Indonesia. So, but you've got to be realistic. Most of the startups in Indonesia cannot go to other countries because the software stacks are not strong enough. They don't have the connections outside Indonesia. Most Indonesian businessmen have no success outside Indonesia. I always comment on this. People don't like it, but if I walk down the street in Tokyo, Hong Kong, or Singapore with one of your ministers, more people would know me, and that's just reality. And Indonesia is very insular in the fact that they think that there's nothing outside there. There's a big world outside there, and there are a lot of people. I think Singapore has a much more, although they've made a lot of losses as well. There's a lot of losses in Singapore, but I don't know, because the VC world's different. It's not regulated, so there's no licensing in the same way there is. If you run a hedge fund, you have to go through regular licensing, like a pilot or a doctor. So it's a very different business. But yeah, I would say the numbers say everybody cannot be a founder, and you shouldn't buy into the glitz. If you really have a passion for something specific and you want to do it, you should really think long and hard about it, and you shouldn't get into the competing with the VC guys, because it's hard. But once you get a good idea and establish the business, there are some good VCs, by the way. Then some smaller who write smaller tickets, but you don't hear so much about them because they're not as loud. So there is guys out there who write smaller tickets who I think there's one of the big families here. I think their fund's only like $50 million. They make like $500,000 investments and things like that. A lot more sensible than some of the other stuff that you've seen. But there again, I don't know, because if the big investment stops at the higher level from the big boys, these smaller guys might dry up as well, because they still need more money to come in, right? So I think at the moment the ecosystem's in a bit of a problem, and I don't think it's easy to change without being like root and branch. It needs to be totally looked at, and again, as you say, the people in power ain't going to be incentivized to do it, because a lot of people hold advisor roles. You just look at the documents I sign for companies, BUMN and stuff. There's a lot of people's second names you recognize, advisors on this, advisors on that. Yeah, that's less likely to happen if there's like people coming through like Zuckerberg who are producing stuff and people are seeing the real product, and people are seeing the real success, and people are seeing the stock price go up, not go down, and then people start to respect this guy as a businessman, right? Not just as a snake oil salesman. It's yeah. I mean, I don't like Elon Musk at all. I think he's a very offensive person in many ways. But you can't argue that he's a driven man who has built lots of companies. But you also look at how he's done it. Yes, he was good in the PayPal, but a lot of those guys have used a lot of government money since then. A lot of those guys have managed to get grants and stuff, and friends from the right places. That's why you can say he's a serial entrepreneur, but it's much easier to do that once you've got certain things going on, right? So yeah, I think people should think long and hard before they do it, and not just jump on the bandwagon. You've got advisors to the government in Indonesia, AI advisors to the government who are 25 years of age in Indonesia, who have no background. And I'm not having a go because some of them are my friends, but and not my friends, but I know some of them I know well. And they come to my office and they're great. I've got nothing against these people, but how the heck, when it comes to like having serious meetings in APAC, is Indonesia going to send some dude who's just out of university? You know what I mean? That's the point. It's insular. It's very insular here. They don't. I guess the world is becoming more insular. Look at America. Clearly, America doesn't care what anybody thinks anymore, and it's a worrying time for the world. I think if America does it, everyone might do it. But Indonesia's always been a bit like that, right? It's very inward looking. It doesn't look outside there, and people have built up a huge brand here on which I always say that the confidence is way ahead of competence when you look at reality. You know, it's the biggest spread I've ever seen. So I think it's, you know, it's not easy. I can't really say to somebody, oh yeah, you should do this. You certainly should get experience, because if I didn't have 20 years business experience, I would have failed. I would have given up, because yeah, as you say, losing all my staff, COVID, people will sit down with me one day and say my heart's in BVT, and then 2 days later they'll give the resignation letter. It's like, wow, really? I'm not used to it, because I worked with the Japanese all my life. We are very close, and we continue to be close. So we very different thought process. You know what I mean? Very, very different to the way that they do it here. So, and I don't think if I had the experience or my personality, I could have succeeded, because you have to bang heads with people. I mean, I've had companies have meetings with me, and then two days later they're trying to pinch my idea and pinch my staff. You know, big conglomerates. And I'm okay to pick up the phone and tell the CEO, don't do that to me, boss. I won't have it. You know, don't do it. And but most people won't do that. You see, that's the problem. And that's the issue. I think most people are very like. I remember 6 years ago when I first started in Jakarta, walking around talking to some of these people and getting told how things were working, and my face just total confusion all the time. And one of my partners, a great guy, but he's from the elite, but a top man. Nothing bad to say about him, but he's friends with all these guys. They don't like. They always say, why do you talk to Martyn? Why do you talk to Martyn? Like, a lot of them don't like me, right? But I remember him explaining to me a lot of these investments a few years ago, when I went like 5-6 years ago, outside Plaza Indonesia, and I'm just like in shock at what we're talking about here. I'm just like, sorry, outside Pacific Place. I'm like, mate, how's that going to work? Mate, how's that going to work? And I'm like, you understand that can't work. That, I mean, but I think that he genuinely believed that it was going to work, because they were just like, we're copying what the US companies were doing, what the US did, and it's worked there. But there's different, them companies that can be totally global in the US for starters. Plus, the US GDP per capita is much higher. So if you're building a B2B product, B2C product, you need a consumer who's got more money. You know, I mean, when they talk about this fintech was never disruption. Never. It was never disruption. I remember talking to somebody and explaining, right, if the richest man in the country decided he didn't want to lend to these people, maybe you should listen. Maybe you should listen, because the richest man in the country didn't think those customers were necessary, right? So, I mean, everybody gets so excited about QRIS like it's some major development. You know, it's just annoying. It's just like, when I'm in a queue, I've got to wait for somebody because the internet's down. This is not something that I ever thought, oh my God, how am I going to survive if I don't have cash? It's not a huge problem. It's okay, but what are the margins on this kind of thing? You know what I mean? What's the margins? How are you going to make money in this kind of thing? Where's the revenue going to come from? No one thought about it. You know, I think when Mokhtar Riyadi got out of OVO, he basically said the same. There's no money in this business. There's no money in this business. You know, we'll stick to what we do. Lipo Group, we can't be in that business. There's no money in it. And you don't think that Robert and his brother BCA guys have not decided a long time ago that market, they'll have had McKinsey look at that market, I'm sure. So how come these young kids come out of university, raise hundreds of millions of dollars and lend money to people who are never going to be able to pay you back? You know, and all this credit score is an illusion, because it's not working very well, is it? You know what I mean? Because I don't know. I hear that like at E-Fisheries was something like 70% of the loans were non-refundable or never going to get the money back. I mean, and it would cost too much to go after them. It's the loans that these guys are giving out to people who I don't know how they expect to ever get the money back, especially with the high interest rates. You know, if somebody, sometimes my friends ask to borrow money, and like in the UK, my friends from a school, they say, can I borrow money? And I always say, well, and if you haven't got $10,000 at 45, you won't have $11,000 at 46, will you? You know what I mean? This is the reality. This is the reality. How is it? He hasn't got any money now, and he's 45, and he's going to give me money back and 10% in a year. How? What's your plan for that? What's your real plan? So yeah, I think realism is. I'm a bit of a realist. I was a whistleblower on a scam actually in Japan called LM Investments, and I got threatened by legal counsel by this very rich Australian guy called Peter Drake. He threatened me legally. He said I was gonna go down and everything. But I'm not stupid. I did the maths. I did the maths on the back of a piece of paper, and I knew he was lying. So he can threaten me as much as he wants. I was in Japan, and I had a visa to be in Japan. If he wanted to take me to the courts, okay. But of course, I was not wrong, and $500 million went missing. And I remember at the time, people accusing me of being Dr. Doom. You're so negative. You're so negative. I said, the numbers don't make sense. The numbers don't make sense. And it's exactly the same as recently, somebody told me I should put money into one of the new banks, because the new banks are giving me a free iPhone if I open an account, and also they will give me 10% interest, right? And my response was, I've seen that story before. So what they're doing with that money, they're not lending that money to other people, or if they are, it's mezzanine financing. They're lending it to high risk people, or they're trading crypto. Either of them, not my risk profile. So it's not cash. It's not cash anymore. People don't learn. I remember the Icelandic banks collapsing in the early 2000s. They were offering 8-9% on sterling cash. My dad came to me and said, hey, Martyn, I'm going to move my money to this Iceland bank. I said, no, you're not. You're not. You can't pay 8% on cash. So these are just similar. Anyone who's got an investment brain knows all this. So I can look at these companies in 2 minutes and think that's not going to work. You know, this is not genius. It's obvious. And there's a lack of critical thought, because there's over respect for people who haven't been particularly good at things. But yeah, it's not easy to change, boss. It's not easy, because there needs to be a heck of a lot of things. But I don't think everyone should be so excited about being a founder, because it's not as sexy as it sounds. But yeah, if you get experience first, try to get some overseas experience, even Singapore or something. And if you have a real passion for something, yeah, go for it. But I don't believe it's like, sipping cocktails in Qatar when the Indonesian government is looking for you. It's not quite that's another funny story. I mean, that guy doesn't seem to give a damn. You know what I mean? He must have connections. He must have connections. I'm sure the Indonesian government could get him brought back here if they wanted. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You think you'd lie low, not do Formula 3 driving or something, whatever it was, and posting on your Instagram. Things like this make no sense. It makes no sense. It's just like, how is this guy still doing this? Surely he would just lie low, It's yeah. And again, it also doesn't make sense how there's been very little with the e-fishery thing. I'm very interested. It's gone very quiet. Somebody said to me, and this is not fact. This is somebody said to me, could be rumor. But he said to me that the e-fishery thing will go very quiet very soon and will all be forgotten about. And I'm like, well, how? All the money's gone. Well, basically, I've noticed that all these investors in e-fishery are not really attacking Gibran. There's no big attacking of him. And that's also, I would love to know why. Why are they not out? If one of my investors did that to me, or one of my, if I did that to somebody, if I'd invested in him, that happened, it will be all over social media. But why are they not attacking him? Because I think everybody knew about it. And if this goes very quiet, I think there's a huge question whether this was money laundering since day one. When you look at the numbers are crazy. If you start looking at the numbers, it's just an insane numbers. And of course, he wasn't part of the elite, which is the really sad story. The really sad story is he was one of the non-elites, which is really, but probably was very easily influenced by the elites. You know what I mean? And for people to say, and again, I've offered to debate this with people, but people won't, which also suggests that I'm not a million miles off. Because if someone said this about me, I would want to set the record straight. If somebody posted on social media tomorrow, Martyn Terpolowski is a fraud, BVT only has 10 people and 2 clients, I go, okay, boss, let's discuss this. But nobody wants to discuss anything like this, with somebody who's an outsider. They don't want to know. Nobody really don't want to know. It's all like this. Tech in Asia interviewed me a few weeks ago for the first time ever. And then they asked me to write an article. So I thought, maybe you're changing now, because you're not owned by the VCs anymore. So I did it. And then when I wrote in quite good English, because I'm actually English, before they posted it, they asked me to recheck it, and they totally changed it. They totally changed it, and I'm like, I'm not putting my name to that because it's clearly not me. You know, people are not stupid. I'm not going to speak like that. So why ask me to write something if you're not going to? You know what you're getting. There's no middle ground. I have an opinion, and I think it's true. I may be wrong, but again, why do people never come back and debate it? They never do. They. So yeah, some of these things are a real mystery when you start looking at them. Yeah, we shall see.
There's a lot of game happening, but Martyn, I think the expectations of people, employees are and founders as well are broken by the VC game, because people is not expecting to spend like 10, 15, 20 years to build business. Instead, they just spend
Absolutely.
like 3, 5 years and they make massive money. They go out quickly.
Of course. I recently met my UBS private banker in Singapore, and I won't say any names, but yeah, his next meeting was with the founder of Indonesian VC. And UBS private bank requires quite a lot of money to open an account. So yeah, this company isn't making money, and I'm guessing they must have sold all their shares in the private market. They are still in, So again, yeah, what generational company was ever built like in this idea, in this way? We people say, oh, VC game's always been the same. No, back in the day, there was far less VCs and there was far less ideas. Now everybody sees this get rich quick scheme, and everybody's like, need to be a founder, need to be a VC. Why do none of these super smart kids go and work in Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Goldman Sachs? Or why not? Because their name doesn't matter anymore there, and no one cares. I've worked with people like Swire kids that own Cathay Pacific. They're just normal people because nobody cares. They even in Hong Kong, they don't. It doesn't get them much. It's like, and often their families hire. Sorry, yeah, not really. They don't like live the dream. No, their parents are quite strict on things like this. But also, Hong Kong's different. Hong Kong's different. They hire professionals. A lot of these. Look at Sun Hung Kai. They've got a lot of British people on the board and stuff. Jardine. They've got foreigners on the board. These countries are always built like this. Look at in the Middle East. They had a lot of foreigners involved with building Dubai, etc. at the beginning, and then the locals learned from the foreigners. That's how it. Even Japan. When I first went to Tokyo, there was many foreign brokers. Now there's far less. You know what I mean? They learn their trade from the people who had the experience already. And this lack of willingness to invite foreign professionals to run businesses, I think, is a slight issue. Of course, we have some Indians, I understand, but particularly in the investment game, as nobody has a track record of like 20 odd years, they should at least look to bring in some people. It's okay saying we're going to get Ray Dalio, we're going to get Ray Dalio as an advisor. I mean, how much time is Ray Dalio going to spend really on Danantara when he's running one of the biggest hedge funds in the world and he sits on advisory board of about 20 companies or whatever? And that's just a name grab and a money grab from him. You know what I mean? Yeah. Can you imagine Ray Dalio sat in the room with some of these people? His experience is more than everyone else in the room. His experience is more than everyone else in the room put together. That's the reality. Tony Blair is considered a war criminal in the UK. There isn't. He can't get a job in the UK, so he goes to Indonesia. I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was hilarious. I had breakfast at the Fairmont recently. And I walked into somebody, and the business card was Tony Blair Institute. I'm like, really? Really? And I felt bad because they thought Tony Blair. We don't have the same high view of politicians that you guys have. Tony Blair walks down the street in England, people throw eggs at him. You know what I mean? It's so he moved to Bali, I think. So people don't understand that. You don't like him? No, of course I don't like him. No, he took us into a war. He took us into a war for no reason. No, nobody particularly likes him. He follows them. No, so yeah. Again, it's difficult because they haven't got them people coming in and the young, because there's this pushback of having like the apples and people are not learning, right? People are not learning. People are not getting the hands-on experience. They need upskilling. Amazingly, I was asked to speak at what's Prabo's party called? What's Prabo's? Garindra, this is kind of funny. Last year, I had some very strange requests. I was asked to speak at Garindra event. I do not know why. I must be the only Bule. They invited me to speak at this event. And also, I spoke at the National Police Conference. I don't know why. But anyways, somebody must have put my name forward, amazingly. But I did this over a very short period of time. And they're asking me about MS 2045. And I said to them, right, I sat next to the CEO of PLN as well. Actually, at this event, they're asking me I said, right, I'm sorry, I don't know why. I'm not political, first of all. You invite me here, I'm not political, so this is not my opinion. I said, but if you want to get to 8% growth, you need to increase innovation dramatically, and you need to cut BUMN and upskill those workforce in some of these larger global entities, like China has done. China basically used China rulebook. China basically brought all the foreigners over and then stole their ideas. That's what China's done. China's now got their own tech companies, their own everything. There's a company, a geospatial company called Esri. It's the biggest in the world, and they do a lot of government stuff. In 2000, they were in China, and then in 2011, China just basically started their own company called Supermap, and all the executives from Esri China joined Supermap. You know what I mean? It's like what Trump's trying to do to TikTok now. It's like, so Indonesia, but China does have a Chinese dream. Jack Ma was a teacher, for example. And I always say Indonesia needs an Indonesia dream. Of course, it's never easy, but UK has many problems, many problems. But there is a British dream. There is multiple people lots of people who've made millions, hundreds of millions, billions from zero. They exist in everyday life, same as Japan. These people do exist. So I think that's what's needed. They need to. BUMN is just going to. It's not at 8% with BUMN. You need to list your GDP per capita. If you take the oligarchs out of Indonesia, I think the GDP per capita is like $3,000. You know what I mean? So how do we get, and all these oligarchs, they invest in Singapore, so because they don't believe in their own stories. So there needs to be real. Indonesia's got everything in place to be successful, but there needs to be hard truths. And I said this at Garindra, and it was uncomfortable because I'm sat next to PLN, and I'm saying, well, I know, there's too much. BUMN is way too big, and the government here is way too big. It's very hard with such a huge public sector companies are by nature not as competitive. So how are you going to get your growth stories? And I'm just having a very few people. And you need the US dream. You need the British dream, because you need to have more. You can't just rely on these 10 behemoths and their kids to do the VCs, right? You've got to have the next thing. Just because these big families and these big conglomerates have started dipping the toes into VC. They've got their own VC arm. But still, it's still being run by friends, that kind of thing. How do you create a situation where you want to get to 8% growth, which is totally achievable in Indonesia? You need to have 50 BVTs, 50 BVTs launched by locals. That we're taking our business overseas now. I don't think that's actually been done before as a software company. Why people don't like it, but people maybe need to ask, how has that happened? How have we not done this? My argument is lots of people in Indonesia is very capable of doing what I've done, but they didn't get the backing financially. And the people who seem to have the money, either they're not capable as they think they are, or they don't need to try as hard as other people. Because so therefore, it's a case study. How come we can open in Vietnam and Japan, and all these other startups can't? How come? Is it because their idea doesn't work? We've already signed contracts with Viettel in Vietnam. Why? What's the reasons for it? It can't be a coincidence. And I've been saying this for years, that there's so much potential, but you need to deal with the BUMN. 8% growth is not possible with that much BUMN, but you can't just deal with that, because obviously people need upskilling. How do you upskill? Well, Apple are offering to invest in your country. Stop fighting them. Tesla are offering to invest in your country. Stop fighting them. They are not competing with you. You don't make any technology. You can't sit there. I don't like Donald Trump at all, but he's got a point. At least when he plays his game, and he'll lose, it's a stupid idea. At least he's got comeback. You have politicians threatening Apple when you don't make phones. You know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to any outsider. Everybody else cheers on, and I just sit there lost. I mean, it's even worse now because Trump's normalizing this kind of behavior. That's what scares me now. Trump is normalizing crazy behavior, and that should worry everybody because, some of this has been a problem, in my opinion. Protectionism does not work. It is not working in Indonesia. Protectionism is holding back the Indonesian economy. Yes, you should protect the farmers, the small businesses, no problem. But when it comes to big tech, how are you going to expand in that space? There's no money. All the VC-backed money in the last 20 years, where's it gone? It's gone into online apps. It's not gone into, I don't see any Indonesian EV cars or vehicles at the moment. But again, it comes back to the same problem, the lack of meritocracy. And one of the failed VC, one guy who's taken at least 2 companies bankrupt, advises BUMN on technology, And then I won't say his name because he's best friends with some of my friends, but it's not personal, but I don't understand how. I do not understand how. And you're never, ever going to get a situation where we have a meritocracy and a growth mindset if people can just do that and have no accountability. I know if BVT doesn't succeed, I'm going to have to go back to work. I don't fancy going back to work at 48 years of age when I haven't had a proper job for 10 years. I don't want to be a 50-year-old stockbroker. I don't want to be a 50-year-old private banker. I don't want to be a 50-year-old anything. I always say to people, I have a 1-in-1 opportunity here, and that's why. Even though there's been days when I've woke up and thought, oh my God, it's game over, and get stressed, I don't have at the end of the day, there's no second chance for me. This has got to work, and therefore you push on. I don't think for a lot of these people that's a situation. A lot of these people during COVID, they locked themselves in their house. They like 25, 30-year-old people thinking they're going to die. I never stopped anything. I just carried on because I had no choice. I can't just have 2 years off. You know what I mean? Everyone accepts the situation. It's like sales, for example. Everyone off last week, right? People said nobody's here. I got around, I think, maybe 5 to 10 new leads last week. So people cannot say that it was impossible, because it's not impossible, because I did it. People, if you have to do something, you generally do it. It's just like, if my boss used to say in Tokyo, if I offered you $1 million to close that deal on Friday, you close that deal on Friday. And he was right. You will. If you're forced to do something, you will do it. And that's, but of course that mentality, it comes with experience, and it comes with, generally so far in life, managing to get things organized, not messing up, in eventually pushing and trusting that it tends to work eventually, in my career before we ended up making money. So, but yeah, it's certainly a difficult time, and conditions. I mean, I hope this 8% there's going to be some realization, but at the moment, government's getting bigger, not smaller. So that's that's the kind of concern, because I don't know how else if you're going to be a protectionist economy, and if you're going to have such a large state-owned enterprises, it's a bit of a pipe dream, 8%. And unless you're going to have a real innovation economy, in the last couple of years, I've heard the same few people talk about Indonesia taking over Singapore as the new stock market for Southeast Asia. I've heard talking about Indonesia as the new innovation hub. I don't understand it. And then people get them like 1,000 likes or 2,000 likes on social media. Most of the Indonesian stock market is not even investable by global investors, because the float's not big enough. So again, most of them are just family businesses. Too many technical listings. Again, the fact that people can say that and get cheered on concerns me, because it shows that it's like a lack of, people either don't know or they believe everything they're told. Because some of these things that are said, like, oh, Indonesia is going to be an innovation hub. You got all the nickel. Why don't you have an EV? Because we were spending money on cloud kitchen, because we obviously after COVID, no one was ever going to leave the house again. You know what I mean? The ideas are crazy. The ideas are from people who are super rich, right? Or some of them, like the idea that the people who thought they were going to die in COVID tend to be the people who've never had to worry about other things. right? Young people who were worried about dying in COVID, and they, they really thought that the whole world was changing and restaurants were all going to close. And did they realize that most people in Indonesia either live with their parents or live in small houses? They like to go out to the warung to meet their friends. This concept that for the rest now everything's going to be at your house only works if you live in Beverly Hills. Yes, if you're living in like a Menteng, maybe, but that's not the rest of the world like to go out. People are social animals. So many of these ideas. Why was the money spied? How can hundreds of millions of dollars has gone into crazy salaries and advertising for food delivery companies that can't make money? This is, I think it's DoorDash, or one of the big ones has just moved out of Hong Kong. This is not an Indonesian exclusive. These food delivery companies struggle to make money anywhere in the world. It's not exclusive, and even harder in Indonesia, where promo driven. But if you look at Gorillas, which was Gorillas is closed in Europe. Some of them have just pulled out of Hong Kong. Yeah, there's many. But at one point, VCs were throwing money at loads of them. There was loads of these companies delivering groceries to your house. And again, the margins are so thin to ever make a profit. Why has that money not gone into real innovation?
Martyn, last question. It's been like 30 minutes past my usual, but it's so fun listening you talk. And internally, I thought a lot of things, but one of the most important question now is for a professional in tech, right? What would you advise if there's no meritocracy around? Then one of your advice just now is to go out and try to find opportunities outside, right? Anything other than that, because opportunities is drying out, at least at the moment. It will come back sometimes, maybe far in the future. But meanwhile, what should we do?
Well, I mean, I think, again, I'm not an expert, but I think there must be some companies, I think, like BVT, whereas, because I don't look at the reputation, I don't really care the school or anything really. I care about their ability. So there must be companies out there. You've got to find a company that fits for you. I know a lady who's worked for Chiputra Group for a long time, and she's like now like working with the senior people, and I think good fit. Respected her, and she respected them, and they've managed to work together for a long period of time. These jobs do exist out there, and there are some good people out there. It's just quite difficult, as you say, when you're finding people getting government advisor jobs when you're far more qualified. For example, it's a very frustrating thing. Certainly, it is not that easy. I think also the tech industry has changed as well. I think the salaries will never be the same as they were. The salaries got crazy and out of control. So you've got a huge amount of people now who were not that good in the first place. I mean, it's funny. We have a test at BVT. My new CTO, he's very quite hardcore, very good. But not 6 months he's been there, but he's really good at pushing things forward. But we have a test there, and half of these people who've been on crazy money before can't pass the test. So there's a huge imbalance to ability, confidence, and confidence is crazy in Indonesia. So that's what I'm finding. Some people who come to me as like some quiet, do a little bit, and they're amazing at their job. I'm like, wow, how good are you? How smart are you? So, but I say I don't know a lot outside BVT. That's the problem. So what I see outside BVT is, in the past, a lot of people maybe getting their job on reputation, especially at the big unicorns and stuff like that. And now, obviously, there's been a huge culling of those people, and they're in the market wanting very high salaries when their competence is not as high as some other people. I mean, my CTO before was in Mandiri Securitas, so which is BUMN and BFI, but very, very good. But what he likes at BVT is his chance to actually impact it. I'm very much, if you're good, you know more than me about this subject, I'll listen to you. But I'm not sure how far that goes in Indonesia. You know what I mean? Because I don't know how far it goes. I mean, I have meetings when I get told to shut up all the time. I'm perfectly okay with that. It's quite frank. You know what I mean? I know, Martyn, you're wrong. You're wrong on this. You're wrong on this, and I'll fight back. Or often, if it's on the technology side, I will give in to the person who knows more. Maybe that's why some of the people I have like a hardcore of people who are very, very driven, and I think they feel like BVT is their company also, but because they actually have an impact on decision making in the company. But I don't know how much that exists in Indonesia as a whole, because often I meet people in positions that's a senior, and I'm thinking, how have they got that job? I don't understand. So yeah, it's hard to for me to give advice, because I've never had a job in Indonesia apart from outside my company, but I've learned a lot that I've hired a lot of people who are nowhere near as good as they said they were. And I've also hired people who came in never really saying they were that good and quite under the radar and very good, very good. In fact, I've got a problem now that I've got a few people who I need to promote, but there's nowhere to promote them to. And that's a challenge when you get a hardcore of really good people, because I don't want them leaving because they don't see the opportunity, because the person above them is very secure. So that's a challenge you get when you've got good people. And I've got some really good people in certain areas, and I need to make sure that they feel loved still. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else. But my experience with staff is, you see, a lot of people think the grass is greener. Many people have left BVT and reapplied. Many, because so many people left my company and come back for a job again. And but again, I don't really see people learning. I still see people leaving to go to other companies and then apply. It's happened many times, but people still do it. So it's hard. When you've got 170 people, you can't. Personally, I don't know everybody, so I only know the heads of department and stuff. So people don't all feel affiliation to me, right? They don't feel that. The people who are close to me, the directors, the heads, that's different. And I was a commissioner before, but I came back in to run the business because I couldn't get the senior management team. The senior management team was not as driven as myself, so I had to shake things up, because I need people. So I just basically, this is what I did. I promoted. I got rid of some of my senior managers last year, and I promoted from within. To an extent of, I probably got the most DEI network in the world. I've got a very DEI. I'm not into quotas at all. But if you came to my company, you would think my company is basically run by young women. But that's nothing to do with them being young women, actually. Not just that. My CTO's a gentleman, and my head of sales as well. But my point is, I've seen enough now to realize there's some really talented people. They need to be in the right jobs. And I can't be paying you to talk all day and play golf. You know what I mean? I can do that. I need the people who can impact this business, and I need the people who believe we're going to go to IPO and be. I'm not talking $1 billion, because that's fantasy, but I'm talking people who believe I can get this company to 50 million revenue and become a real serious player. Because I believe that, and I know if we go to Japan, I have the contacts to do that. I need people who believe that, and if I can get people to believe that, I believe I will make them rich. But it's getting that message across those people. That's how I made my money. Somebody believed in me when I was 23, 24 years of age, and then I managed to go up the ranks and made money. From having no money when I was 23 to having a 7-figure salary when I was 28. So things went very quickly, but I worked my backside off because I wanted to get to financial independence. I need those people. I don't need. My issue is I don't want. Maybe people don't like it, and I'm being more and more direct about it. If people want a 9-to-5 job, they should go and work at BUMN. It's a startup company. I think BVT got quite big, and people get a bit relaxed about it. We have no tech winter. Never get sacked. Everybody wants to work from home. None of it. I'm not having all this work from home nonsense. I'm very much. I know how it works in Indonesia. Work from home. I can check productivity. It doesn't work. It works for some people. I agree, but not everybody. That's the challenge, right? That's the challenge. So I can't really advise, because it's very, very difficult. But I think if you get in there with the right company, and you show the right attitude, I believe that there are people out there who will back you. Unfortunately, then people are more likely to be foreigners, which is a shame, because there's not many foreigners in the business. But yeah, Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's more likely to be a foreigner than, because foreigners have that. They don't really care. I mean, I don't care about MBAs. I don't care about. I care about, are you good at your job? It's not a negative. It's a positive if you've got an MBA, but it's not my deciding factor on employment or skill or salary. My deciding factor is, are you good enough to do this? And I dropped the ball for a bit on this, to be honest. I hired on reputation a bit, and then I realized that the people below these people were better. So I started making a noise last year saying, if you guys don't, well, I had a company team building event last year, and half my senior management decided not to come, which was kind of made me rather annoyed, because they said, oh. Anyway, yeah, of course, it didn't show great. Yeah, I wasn't very happy about it, obviously. So I wanted people to show, what's it called, show ownership of the company, because I can't do this alone. I can't do this alone. I don't have the family in Indonesia to back me. It's very stressful. I need people who want to make money like I made, but want to have the passion to take this global. To sit there and say, I was part of the first Indonesian company that ever went big in Japan. I need people to think that. If people don't think like that, they're in the wrong place. But if they think like that, they're at the right place and will get paid very well for it.
Awesome, awesome. I got goosebumps hearing your last words just now. Thank you very much, Martyn. So it's very enlightening, and at the same time, it's very worrying for me.
Sorry, I know. I need to learn to sugarcoat things a bit better.
No. You should just stay as it is, right? Because if you don't do
Believe
it,
me,
nobody's going to do that.
Believe me, I talk to senior people in BKPM, and I tell them this, and I'm telling them, I'm not saying this to criticize, I'm saying this to try to help. Somebody needs to tell somebody, because there isn't going to be progress if we just do events and everyone cheers on people saying things that are not real. It's not going to be no progress. Having an event and somebody cheering somebody on who says something that's not really possible, somebody who talks about, somebody bangs on about, the last point I'll make about this local content. Everybody in Indonesia, ministers, talk about local content. I produce local content in Indonesia. I create jobs in Indonesia. It gives me no benefits whatsoever. This is a problem. I've told ministers, I might move my head office to Singapore if you don't help me here. You're not helping me. Why are you not helping me? I'm one of the few companies that actually set up here. My tax is paid here, or I pay my staff's tax. I pay all the, what's it called? What's the BPGS? I pay all this for my staff. I'm not behind with anything. Why don't you support companies like us instead of doing all these big things with Tani Hub and eFishery? Well, we know the answer. We know the answer because the connections of the people invested in those companies. No one gives a damn about BVT, to be honest. I hate to say it. And in the government, really, if I was these guys, and no, that's not fair. Some of the people at mid-level are very supportive of me, yes, but they really struggle to get buy-in at the top, because the buy-in at the top is, basically he's a boule. It's only a B2B business. We don't really care. I would be thinking, okay, first Indonesian company ever to go to Japan, Vietnam, potentially global. I would be all over that as a potential story about innovation. But there's nothing like this. Nothing. I'm not part of the elite, so no one gives a damn. And maybe I bought, and even worse than that, because I bought out originally one of the elite, I think it counts against me. It counts against me because I bought out one of the elite because I wanted to do the business properly and not go down the avenue that everybody else went down. I refused to go down that avenue. So I bought out one of the elite, and we are friendly still, or not best mates, but no problem. They made money out of it. Everybody's happy. And that actually counts against me trying to do it properly in Indonesia. I was told recently by somebody at BPN, the National Land Agency, that it's a concern for them dealing with me because of my history with somebody else. I'm like, me and that person are fine. Why? Surely you guys should be backing local companies, local talent. How are you you can't innovate and become a first world power unless you have more innovators. And innovators are not going to be these kids of people because they don't need to innovate because they've got money already. They're not hungry. They're not going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and start sending text messages to people. It's just a different culture. Do you think the founders of most of these companies in Indonesia are working like me and like living like I am? For sure not. You know, I've got less money than I've had in 25 years. I've never been so poor. You know, it's just the lack of help. It's really frustrating. And you would think that they would really want to, as you say, goosebumps. I sometimes get goosebumps, what we can do, what we can achieve. But it would be so much easier if there was help. You know what I mean? So much easier.
Yeah, unfortunately, you will not. It's better to not expect that those kind of helps. More likely than
I
not.
just mean support. I just mean, like, you know, a lot of the ministers are regularly still visiting the VCs and still, you know, acting as advisors to the VCs. And yeah, we know it's whatever car crash happens, it just gets brushed under the carpet. There's no accountability. Well, there is people in Indonesia, and I'm sure there's not just me. I'm sure there's other people. I'm just louder, who are building real businesses, and that doesn't seem to get the attention. The attention is all unicorns, billionaires, you know, people writing books about unicorns when they've never returned money to investors. It's madness, you know. But that's the people tend not to. If you spoke like this in Hong Kong, Japan, with the track record, people would call you out at every event. You know, you'd be like, it's not staged. It's people will be calling you out at every event. You know what I mean? So, but I guess that doesn't happen here. So, yeah, lack of accountability and meritocracy is an issue for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Martyn. I really think we should do this again sometime in the future. At least I wanted to learn more about what you are doing, and get more of your thoughts on other topics as well. But I won't keep you more on this weekend. I really wish that BVT will be successful and will be one of the first companies that performs very well globally. That's coming from Indonesia, and I wish you will not move your office outside of Indonesia, but I don't care about that.
Right. I also, last point. Yeah, I also don't want to do that. We've always been an Indonesian company, but there's a few challenges at the moment. I'll be honest with you. And I have partners. I have partners, and people are concerned, if we're not getting help here, what's the benefits to have it here? And also, that people are concerned, political stability, increased military involvement. It worries Japanese. It worries Japanese, unfortunately. My partners are Japanese, and it worries them. So I have to consider what they want also. I've been trying to meet I've been trying to meet I don't know if he's still doing the job, but the beekeeping minister, the now head of Dan Tariff, for quite a long time, but it never really happens. The people who work for him are very good and really support me, but they want me to tell my story direct to him because they think it's a very good story that he needs to know. But whether he wants to know my story, I doubt very much, unfortunately.
Yeah,
they'd rather do that.
Any upside for him to learn about it, unless he really.
I would think there'd be huge. Yes, that's the issue, and that's the concern. There will be huge upside to learn about it if they cared, and that's what worries me. Do people do? It's more interesting to have an event and a big razzmatazz event and take pictures than actually get the results.
For sure, that's how it works in Indonesia, right?
Seemingly, yes. Seemingly, yeah. The golden visa. I was invited to the Ritz-Carlton about the golden visa. I mean, that's another long conversation. So we won't go into it now. But that's just typical. All the money spent. The president invites people directly. You go to the Ritz-Carlton. Nobody really understands what benefits are. No one can tell me what my tax obligations are. The amount I have to pay keeps changing. Doesn't make any sense. It's not a real golden visa, but all they have to do is look at Malaysia. Malaysia has a real one. Malaysia has a very good one. Many Japanese and Koreans live there. I don't know who. Well, again, but who's advising these people? Are they senior financial experts? Have they got Henley Group? Henley Group is an advisor on this kind of thing. They often send me messages about, Martyn, have you thought about moving to Portugal, or because of this benefit or dual citizenship? Who? I mean, Indonesia's idea. Nobody can tell me who thought of it. Anything. Nobody can explain it to me. But there was a huge event with the president, and I got a private invite. I don't really it doesn't look really good when people just don't understand what you've just held at a big event and nobody can explain it.
Yeah, I think that's just how it is for now. Let's just wish for the best and do whatever we can for now.
Absolutely, boss. No, I'm very positive. I'm very positive in general about Indonesia, but I think it's also my. If I don't speak like this, it's worse of me. I've got to speak like this because people, at least somebody's got to say the way it is rather than sugarcoating it. And if I hope somebody can listen, but yeah, I mean, as I say, I know some of the ministers directly, and they know my opinion, and I don't know. I think I just become an irritation at some point because I've got different. My thought process is very, very different. Yeah.
Okay. Very, very nice to speak with you, and I'm wishing to have another chance to speak with you again in the future. So again,
Okay, boss.
BVT to be very well, very successful, and who knows, people from your company later after you got IPO will be coming back and build other business and helps other people to.
That's the one. That's the one. That's how it should. That's how it should work. That's how business should work. Exactly. Because look at the PayPal mafia, for example. The PayPal mafia. Indonesia is not going to have that with Gojek because they'll just go and do that. They won't do the businesses because the PayPal was a successful business. Then they got out of it, but they've made a lot of money out of it. But is it a successful business? They're not going to risk their own money on it, right? That's the issue. These guys who've made lots of money out of all the startups, they're raising money for their own VCs now. But are they really going to invest? Because do they believe in their own mind they're a good business person based on the results they had the first time? They might have made money out of it. But does that mean they were very good? And that's the question. So why are these people now not pumping money into real innovation in Indonesia? Why have we not got these guys who've made off like bandits pumping into? But they're not. I've met some of them. They're talking about partnerships and introducing them to some Japanese investors. They're not. What about you? You've made $100 million. Get it invested. Come on. You love your country. Oh no, I'm buying a house in Singapore. It's yeah. You know how it is.
Yes. Okay. Have a very good weekend, boss.
All right, mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.